There's a saying among historians that anything written about events less than 20 years old is journalism, not history. That's because history, as an explanation of the past, requires the perspective that comes from the passage of time. However, I think it's already possible to identify events and aspects of the Trump presidency that are historic. It's already possible to glimpse Trump in history. I'll quickly preface this by noting that I've never been a Trump supporter, and I think it's appropriate to acknowledge my bias. However, this video is not an attack on President Trump, and this channel is for everyone. Now, let's get to it. Here are the top 5 historic features of the presidency of Donald Trump. Number 5. Transforming the Republican Party. Prior to Trump's takeover of the party in 2016, the tenets of the Republican Party were clear and consistent. Smaller government, law and order, standing up to terrorists and dictators, free trade, personal accountability, high moral standards. Today, as evidenced by their statements and their policies, Republicans don't believe in any of that anymore. Instead, the Republican Party has but 3 principles: protecting Trump, defending Trump, and maintaining power for Trump and his acolytes. People who adhere to former Republican principles are still around, but either most of them aren't Republicans anymore or they hold no influence in Republican circles. So Trump has transformed the Republican Party by rupturing it and remaking it in his own image, stamping it with his name as prominently as he does with his buildings. America only has 2 major parties, so when one of them suddenly and casually dismisses the vaunted principles of Lincoln, Eisenhower, and Reagan, and substitutes them for the host of The Apprentice, that's a big story that will resonate in history. Number 4. Trump's handling of COVID-19. Tens of thousands of Americans would have died from COVID-19 regardless of who was president. As of January 2021, close to 400,000 Americans have been lost. The question is, could Trump have done anything differently that would have meant fewer deaths? Absolutely. In recordings released by Washington Post reporter Bob Woodward, Trump acknowledged how dangerous the virus was. But in public, he dismissed the threat, downplayed it, and invented absurd scenarios about how it would play out, such as it would just disappear at some point, quote, like magic. Clearly, magic has not been an effective public health solution. When the Woodward recordings were released, Trump's defense was that he downplayed the virus because he didn't want to cause panic. This, coming from the man whose entire political career has been founded on trying to stoke panic about Mexican, quote, rapists, Latin American gangs, non-Norwegian immigrants, anyone who isn't white, or all Democrats. It's an historian's job, by the way, to critically evaluate claims and to provide context, not just to robotically repeat them. Anyway, it's beyond argument that if Trump had come out early last year and told everyone that COVID-19 is dangerous, so wear a mask, wash your hands, listen to public health experts, stay indoors when possible, and practice social distancing, that more Americans would be alive today. He didn't. In fact, he did the opposite, and history will note it. Number 3. Trump tried to overturn an election. Trump's own election security officials, his own highly partisan attorney general, and all state Republican election officials agree that the election of 2020 was free and fair and that Biden won. But Trump couldn't accept that he was rejected by most Americans, so he engaged in a prolonged, coordinated attempt to reverse the results of the election. Trump tried to push support for his illegal effort by lying about widespread voter fraud, falsely claiming problems with voting machines, and asserting they had evidence for his victory. But in more than 60 court cases, Trump's legal team never presented any evidence, not even to judges appointed by Trump. Trump personally pressured state and local election officials to, quote, find votes that would change the results, to invalidate the votes of African Americans in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere, and he insisted that Vice President Pence refrain from certifying the Electoral College results, something Pence lacked the authority to do. In the election of 1960, Richard Nixon strongly suspected that his narrow loss to John F. Kennedy was the result of voter fraud in Chicago. Evidence suggests that he was right. In 1824, Andrew Jackson's supporters accused John Quincy Adams of a, quote, corrupt bargain with Senator Henry Clay that led to Adams winning an election that was decided by the House of Representatives, and Clay later becoming Secretary of State, which at the time was the major avenue to the presidency. Jackson and Nixon were annoyed by their defeat, though later both became president. But no presidential candidate, let alone sitting president, has ever engaged in an orchestrated effort of propaganda and illegal intervention to nullify an election in order to retain power. The consequences of that attempt will reverberate for decades. Number 2, Trump was impeached twice. Any impeachment is notable because it is so rare. In more than 230 years, it's only happened 4 times. The others were Andrew Johnson in 1868 and Bill Clinton in 1998, about which there will be some videos forthcoming. Of course, the other 2 times have been Trump. The first time, in January 2020, the articles of impeachment were for obstructing Congress and the abuse of power, which related to his admitted attempt to use American taxpayer money in the form of foreign aid to bribe the president of Ukraine into announcing an investigation into Joe Biden's son Hunter with the goal of damaging Joe Biden's presidential prospects. The next impeachment, in January 2021, the single article of impeachment accused Trump of inciting insurrection related to his conduct prior to the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. While Trump probably will not be the last president to face impeachment, being impeached twice will be a record that'll be hard to beat. But I'm sure someone down the road will say, "Challenge accepted." And finally, number 1. Provoking insurrection and fomenting a coup. January 6, 2021, the date on which Congress was scheduled to certify the Electoral College results. On that day, not coincidentally, Trump convened what he called the Stop the Steal rally. What did he think was being stolen? The presidency. Trump asked his supporters to come to Washington, which thousands did. He told them that the election was being stolen by the, quote, radical left and by the, quote, fake news media. He told the crowd that they, including him, would, quote, walk down to the Capitol and that they would have to, quote, show strength. Trump did not walk with them. And what the mob did was damage and destroy public property, attempt to kidnap or kill elected officials, including the vice president, and try to forcibly install Trump as president for life. 6 people died as a result. Was Trump responsible? It was his rally. He summoned his followers. The people who attacked the Capitol were doing so at his behest. He told them to march to the Capitol and that he would be with them. Would the attack on the Capitol have happened if Trump hadn't spoken at the rally? If he hadn't told his supporters to come to Washington? If he hadn't convened a rally called Stop the Steal and said that if they didn't do anything, the U.S. would have a, quote, illegitimate president? I think the answers are obvious now, and they'll be obvious when future historians ask the same questions. All right, that's it. 5 events and aspects of the Trump presidency that we already know will loom large in history. Do you agree with this assessment? Should any others have been in the top 5? Let everyone know in the comments, and thank you for watching.